Hi everybody, this is Lex, and this video is going to give you a little background to ancient Athens and life of Socrates, and the two texts we're going to read for our first session, the Apology and the Crito, written by Socrates' student Plato. To set the scene a little bit, Greece, the classical period of Greece, is talking around about 500, 400 BC. And so in the larger story of settled civilization, Greece is pretty late on the scene. Greece is, you could say, a marginal society on the margins of a much older urban civilized world that was centered around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and what's now Iraq, where the first city-states flourished around 3000 BC, and the Nile River in Egypt, where the first dynasties, again, were around between 3000 and 2500 BC. And there was a major collapse of this first global order, we call the Bronze Age collapse, around 1100, 1000 BC. And so the world of the Greeks is on the edge of this older, more settled, you could say more civilized and sophisticated world. There was no emperor of Greece. There was no pharaoh. There were just a lot of cities, each with their own customs, their own cults and rituals, their own political systems, their own social networks, and so the way to think about Greece at this time is it's not a country. It's a collection of cities, around 1,000 cities, each one called a polis. Plato puts it this way: like frogs around a pond, we've settled around the shores of this sea. So there were Greek-speaking cities in North Africa, as far west as Sicily and southern Italy, where there are still actually some Greek-speaking communities today, and as far north and east as the coasts of the Black Sea. And so the Greeks had this benefit of being close enough to the larger, more sophisticated worlds of Persia and Babylonia and Egypt to benefit from things like the alphabet and navigation techniques and science, but far enough away that they weren't directly controlled by the pharaohs and emperors. Round about the 500s BC, we see a couple disruptions. The population is growing, coming out of this period we call the Dark Ages. The Greek world rediscovers writing and the alphabet. The alphabet that you're reading this on this screen is a Latin alphabet that is based on the Greek alphabet, that's based on the Phoenician alphabet that comes from what's now Lebanon. So Homer's Odyssey and Iliad are written down from much older oral stories, written down around 750 BC. But around the 500s, you get this major disruptive technology, which are coins. And coins disrupt the social order because for the first time in human history, you could create massive wealth without land, without needing to own a lot of land. And this meant big changes in how power was distributed in society. So instead of the old noble land-owning families having control over most cities in Greece, you had these new money families, and for the first time, with enough power to be able to put someone from their group on the highest rank of power. And this new class of rulers were called tyrannoi, which we get our word tyrant from today. But in the initial use, it wasn't a bad word. It was a neutral word that just meant someone who didn't have a dynastic claim to rule. So a tyrant was someone who was ruling because of their connections and their money, but not because of their family name. The word polis, from which we get the word politics and political, originally meant a fortress. An armed place that you could go to if you were a farmer to get protection from invading bandits. And as we get towards the 500s, it starts to take on a new meaning of the political community, this immaterial idea of all of us who follow these same rules, who share in these same practices. We are all politai. It's the plural of polites, which means a citizen. And it's one of the first words to designate a kind of a political identity that didn't mean you were ruled by a single person. So there were about 1,000 of these city-states. You have this disruption of the 500s BC, and into this context we get the beginning of democracy. So how does democracy appear in Athens? Well, because a lot of common people came together at a moment of crisis to force out the ruling family of tyrants that had been running the city, and when the aristocrats who were trying to replace the tyrants, when they called in the biggest army in the Greek world, the Spartan army, to come and invade Athens in 508 BC and establish their right to rule, they surrounded the Acropolis and in a bloodless siege forced out the Spartan army in a very surprising way. And their champion, their ally among the wealthy Athenians was a man named Cleisthenes. And so this coalition of everyday people, the carpenters, the farmers, the shoemakers, and Cleisthenes together created this new way of distributing power. And the principles, we're going to give you just a couple of the core principles, and you'll see how different this system was from what we call democracy today. The first thing they did was assign everybody an identity, a new civic identity, one being one of 10 civic tribes. So you had a new last name. Each of the tribes was named after one of the ancient heroes of Athens. And each of the tribes got 50 seats yearly on the council, which is sort of the ruling body of state. There was no one president or prime minister. There was this council of 500 that was chosen randomly across the 10 tribes, and each of the tribes had members from the downtown city, the outlying hills, and then the coastal regions. So this was a way of creating what we would call today a representative sample of citizens, and it would rotate every year. Imagine getting a year where you were one of the 500 people effectively ruling the state. Now, the council was, in a sense, a supporting function to the assembly. The assembly was open to all citizens. The council was selected randomly from the citizens, just 500 per year. But the council was always on duty. There were 50 council members at any given point who were on 24-hour duty, and that responsibility would rotate through the different tribes that year. And so you would receive embassies, and they would, make decisions what to do in the crisis, and they would propose the assembly agenda. And so almost all Athenian citizens would serve on the council at least once, and sometimes twice in the course of their career. So it's like getting a PhD in politics. And so this was a very intensive way of learning about politics. No matter how much money you had, this was open to rich and poor citizens alike. The assembly was open to everybody, and around 4,000 to 6,000 would come for each meeting. And this was the sovereign body of the state. So all decisions about taxes, war and peace, policy would be debated in these open sessions and could be voted up or down. So the council was preparing these sessions, and the assembly of citizens would vote by majority, and it was one person, one vote. And this had never happened, as far as we know, in history at this large scale. So they took these small scale idea from villages about making decisions together and scaled it up to the level of a city. To do this, they needed technology to assure the fairness of the process, that people couldn't manipulate the process. So this is an ancient randomizing device called a claritarion that worked with black and white balls, and if you got the white ball in your slot, you would be chosen. There's actually a great video on this. You can Google it, how the claritarion worked. But so they used technology to help create fairness and transparency in the system, and also to choose the council, but also the jury. So there was an annual pool of 6,000 citizens chosen from the total citizen body, which could be between 40 and 50,000 people. And then from that body of citizens, the pool for that year, you would have, but from 200 to 501, always an odd number chosen every day, and they would, all of the judicial conflicts would be heard by these juries. There were no special lawyers or special judges. All the judicial disputes were heard by these citizen juries. Finally, they had a system called ostracism that if any one person was trying to become too dominant and take too much power, you could write their name on a piece of pottery, and once a year, if enough people had written your name on the pottery, you would be ostracized, which meant you would be thrown out of the city for 10 years. You wouldn't be killed. You wouldn't be put in jail. There were no prison systems in ancient Athens. Your property would be safe. Your family would be safe, but you would have to leave. This was their way of keeping balance in the system so that no one dominated. And then finally, there were these civic festivals where several times a year, all the citizens would come together and do sacrifices together and watch these plays, tragedies and comedies that would be telling stories about interesting mythological events from the past, but these stories would help the community think through complex moral issues like loyalty to family versus loyalty to the community, how to stop cycles of violence, whether empires are a good idea or not. So these were very active and participatory forms of entertainment where the citizens would be building a set of common references, not common stories, and building their skills as critical thinkers about politics. So in our next video, we're going to look at what we call the civic intelligence to make democracy work, and then we're going to get into what this meant for Socrates and his life.